Gab Newell, also known as Gab-N1, is the co-founder of Valve Corporation, and creator of the Half-Life series. He is moderately famous on the internet for his controversial views on console gaming, his large physique, and relation to Valve series such as Portal, Left 4 Dead and Half-Life. Since he has delayed announcing the release of Half-Life 2, Episode 3, or even a sequel to Half-Life 2, he is often depicted as a troll. Personal life. Gab Newell was born on November 3, 1962. He dropped out of Harvard University to work for Microsoft. In 1996, Gab Newell and Mike Harrington, another Microsoft employee, dropped out of Microsoft too, and used their profits to found a video game studio, Valve. After a meeting with John Carmack, co-founder of id Software, they decided to license the Quake engine to create their first game, Half-Life. Gab has since been working on other Valve series such as Portal, the co-founder and CEO of the video game studio known as Valve Software. Gab serves as the unofficial face of Valve. The studio is widely associated with him and he is widely associated with the studio. Valve are infamous for their long development cycles, with games that can be in development for as long as 9 years. Combined with frequent delays, these long development times have created the Valve time phenomenon. Many in-jokes about these delays and long development times were formed. These jokes often made fun of the studio and Gab himself, calling him lazy and mocking his weight. He is also pictured as a rather greedy man who wants to keep Half-Life 2 Episode 3 to himself and commonly makes obscure excuses in order to delay it farther. One of the largest spin-offs of this small meme is the nickname Gab-N. Most users of these jokes are found in large Valve communities, such as the Team Fortress 2 community and the Half-Life community. Valve co-founder Gab Newell says there are very good reasons why there's been no news about Half-Life 2 Episode 3 recently, but he can't actually tell anyone what they are. Plus, amid all the kerfuffle surrounding the announcement of Left 4 Dead 2 is the fact that more than a year and a half has passed since the release of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and yet Episode 3 doesn't even have a release date. Most companies put out games episodically in order to shorten the delay between releases and keep the fans interested, but that doesn't seem to be Valve's plan. In the time between the November 2004 release of Half-Life 2 and today, the studio has managed to release precisely 2 follow-up episodes. There are good reasons for that, according to Valve Managing Director Gab Newell. Unfortunately, if he told you what they are, he'd have to kill you. I get a ton of email every day saying why aren't you talking about Episode 3? He said in an interview with G4. And there are very good reasons why we're not talking about Episode 3, which I can't talk about yet. He recognizes that not everyone is happy with the long delays between releases, however, even though he said Valve is happy with its development processes and schedule. I think there's frustration there and I'm not somehow going to say that that's not legitimate or length isn't a concern, or regularity, he continued. The speed with which these updates are coming out, people say, hey, gee, these episodes are supposed to be shorter and you take 25 years to ship each one, so I don't want to somehow dismiss those concerns. Still, there appears to be a significant gulf between not wanting to dismiss gamers' concerns and actually addressing them. When asked point-blank if he thought more information about Episode 3 would be available by the end of the year, Newell had this to say. Just so you know, the thing to me that feels right is the rhythm that Robin Walker, software developer/designer and his team are operating with. It's like watching the reaction of the community, watching their ability to respond, looking at the quality of the work they're getting with the length of those development cycles. They're having a great time. And I think it shows on the other side, right? I mean, they were just giggling so hard when they were changing the buttons in the movies to say leak video. Do you remember the big screen with all the buttons? And they were like, we have to put leaks video into the thing before we release it. They were just like cackling away. What should have been like, pretty demoralizing and stressful was for them, oh, this is no big deal, so, yeah, people get the idea. Thanks for clearing that up, Gab. Read more at http://www.escapeofsmuggers.com/news/view/92365. Gab Newell discusses Episode 3. DDLAY-BDK Nord Mar Nord YT1ERM6G4.99.
Half-Life 2, Episode 3. Game consists of 2 releases, PC Mac. If this final chapter of the Half-Life 2 saga is ever released, it will continue the adventures of Gordon Freeman as he fights the trans-dimensional armies of the Combine in a valiant effort to end their occupation of Earth once and for all. GameWiki. Images, 4. Forum, 43. News. Guide. Releases, 2. DLC. Reviews. Related pages. Forums Half-Life 2. Episode 3, a reasonable proposition for what's taking so long. Goram Orkarika. Follow. Sent PM. Forum posts. 426 wiki points. 412 followed by 6 reviews. Nord lists. 1 number 1 posted by Goram Orkarika. 426 posts, minus 1 year, 3 months ago. This is all hypothetical, based on the small amount of things we do actually know and my own intuition. Valve was probably working on episode 3, expecting it to come out just like episode 2 did. For whatever reasons, it began to take longer than they expected, plus the extra time spent on the portals and Left 4 Deads. As the end to the Half-Life 2 story arc, they have said episode 3 is not the end of the Half-Life franchise. By the way, that probably had something to do with it. The game got too big. Eventually they decided that this needs to be a full game. The source engine is showing its age, even though they have done a lot to prolong it. The reason why we haven't seen anything beyond a few pieces of concept art is because episode 3 is being made with a brand new engine, and if they were to show a video or screenshots, we would all know it to no fanfare. A new engine would be a very big deal, it affects all of their games, and I think it's pretty reasonable that they would want to make some kind of big announcement to show off the new source engine instead of having it drizzle out. On February 20th, Gab said, "Part of the reason that we backed off talking so much about what was happening in the future is that when we've done that in the past, with Half-Life 1 it was a year after we originally said it would be. Half-Life 2 basically, if you go and read the forum posts, apparently took us 50 or 60 years to get done, so we're trying to be careful not to get people too excited and then have to go and disappoint them, so we're sort of reacting in the other direction and saying, okay, well let's have things a little more baked before we start getting people all excited about it." Both Half-Life 2 and Team Fortress 2 changed massively since when they were both being shown off. I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm going to guess that the new source engine will use fluid dynamics first experimented with in Portal 2. It will be called Water Source.
Gamers everywhere are understandably stoked for any news of the long-in-development sequel, Half-Life 3. Or maybe it's Half-Life 2, Episode 3. As yet, Valve has never officially acknowledged the game, so it may not even exist. But Valve Managing Director Gab Newell had some very interesting things to say on a recent podcast that sure seemed to be about Half-Life 3, specifically, what's taking them so long to put it out. On a recent episode of 7 Day Cooldown, Newell spent a long time talking about the development process of Ricochet 2, which is most likely a coded way of discussing the next Half-Life. The reasoning for not just discussing the game outright is fascinating. Newell feels that exposing fans to the ongoing heartbreak and toil of a game's development does them a disservice, but he still wanted to discuss Ricochet 2, which is, hypothetically, Half-Life 3, or Half-Life 2, Episode 3. It's all very convolution, as I'm sure you've noticed. Anyway, under the read more, you'll see Gab's entire quote, and I suggest you pore over it and read it like psychics read tea leaves for any clues or hints as to when we'll see Half-Life 3 and what sort of game it will be. News. Half-Life 3 rumors amount to community trolling. In terms of Ricochet 2, we always have this problem that when we talk about things too far in advance, Newell said, we end up changing our minds as we're going through and developing stuff, so as we're thinking through the giant story arc which is Ricochet 2, you might get to a point where you are saying something is surprising us in a positive way and something is surprising us in a negative way, and, we'd like to be super transparent about the future of Ricochet 2. News. Half-Life 3 protest provokes smile. Interview. There's a lot of expectations build up about the next Half-Life, I think you'll agree, and the story is only part of it. There's also the huge strides action/FPS games have made technically since the release of the last Half-Life game was released. For instance, would a Half-Life game have to include health recharging and a robust cover system? Would it have to also feature multiplayer of some kind? Leave your thoughts in our comment section.
Y con eso concluye este tema. En el siguiente episodio les voy a hablar de las teorías pendejas acerca de la historia de Half-Life. Va a ser en español. Y les voy a decir por qué la mayoría de ustedes tienen la cabeza bien entre el culo al escuchar sin cuestionar lo que otros loquenderos dicen, sabiendo que todos fallan en comprender algunas cosas muy importantes. Cosas que me hicieron descargar la versión en español de los juegos para ver si era un mal doblaje lo que los tenía a todos entendiendo la historia tan jodidamente mal. En fin, ahora los dejo con estos artículos sin relevancia alguna.
Planetside 2 Review. An Education in Warfare, PC. It may lack accessibility, but Planetside 2 is still one of the best shooters this year. By Dustin Quillen, March 12, 2012. Share it. Planetside 2. Planetside 2 isn't interested in explaining itself. Want to know why their planet or axis is caught in a three-way tug-of-war between red guys, blue guys, and purple guys? Go read a wiki. Having trouble understanding some basic gameplay systems? Tough luck. Not sure where to go or what to do in general? You're on your own, pal. No, Sony Online Entertainment's free-to-play MMOFPS doesn't deal in explanations. Mostly, it's in the business of serving up carnage on a ridiculous scale, as well as constantly dishing out amazing, player-driven moments that you'd swear were scripted, a flying gunship exploding, because somebody steered an orbital drop pod through it, for instance. And though it might be jarring the first time Planetside dumps you into its massive world, those who break the learning curve will discover a gorgeous, dynamic shooter with bigger firefights than any other game of its kind. If you've played much of the recent Battlefield games online, then you already have a head start in comprehending Planetside 2. Like Conquest mode in DICE's FPS franchise, Planetside basically amounts to one big land grab. The game's three factions compete over territory by overwhelming control nodes in key areas of the map. Once a team owns a majority of a region's control nodes long enough, then that segment of the world becomes their property. The main difference here is that Planetside 2's three maps span entire continents, each of which could easily swallow up more than 20 of the largest Battlefield 3 multiplayer levels. Planetside 2. Planetside 2 justifies such huge environments with an equally outsized player count. Servers top out at 2,000 people, which, even split across 3 continents and just as many factions, absolutely dwarfs anything possible in games like Battlefield, Call of Duty, or MAG. At peak hours, this translates to literally hundreds of combatants gunning for the game's most valuable objectives all at once. The seamless nature of the maps also helps create circumstances totally unique to Planetside. For example, if a fight starts to go south for a detachment assaulting one part of the map, they might cut their losses and spill over into conflicts in neighboring regions. A sudden influx of reinforcements like this can be either devastating or miraculous, depending on your point of view. The sheer size of the armies in Planetside 2 makes teamwork a necessity. Lone wolf types occasionally slip behind enemy lines and carve out a bit of territory for their team, but they're just as likely to have their work undone by a coordinated group with superior numbers. And while the jet-pace-equipped basic infantry play an essential role in combat, support classes like medics and engineers can completely turn the tide of battle with their ability to keep soldiers and vehicles in the fight. Even the game's exceptionally lethal mechanized units are at their best with a few squad mates bringing up the rear. It's fairly easy to form squads, thankfully, and Planetside 2 further incentivizes team play by awarding bonus experience for assisting fellow squad members. Beyond that, squad leaders are able to unlock special perks like spawn beacons, allowing teammates to drop from orbit into designated war zones. They also have access to squad-specific chat and voice channels, though the latter doesn't meet the quality standards of external VoIP options like Mumble or Ventrilo. Planetside 2. Every piece of land in the game confers some sort of bonus to the team controlling it. Sometimes that means a periodic influx of resources for purchasing things like troop transports or aircraft. Other locations offer increased health regeneration or access to the most powerful tanks. And locking down an entire continent will grant a global discount on either infantry equipment, ground vehicles, or aerial units. These little advantages give you a good reason to single out specific objectives, but Planetside does such a poor job illustrating this that you might play for hours without realizing these systems were in place. In fact, it's the complete lack of a tutorial that's responsible for many of the biggest problems in Planetside 2. For example, if you want to know a surefire way to separate the newest players from veterans, look no further than tech plants, biolabs, and amp stations. These futuristic, corporate Terradroma-looking bases provide some of the best passive benefits in the game, and, as such, are very well defended. Specifically, they all come equipped with large energy shields that prevent ground troops and vehicles from easily breaching their perimeters. It's possible to disable a series of generators powering these barriers, but because the game never spells out how to do this, you'll invariably find swarms of clueless infantry clustered around force fields like flies drawn to a bug zapper. The end result is pretty similar in both scenarios. As a free-to-play release, Planetside 2 relies on a backbone of microtransactions. On the in-game store you'll find a typical assortment of temporary experience point boosters and cosmetic items. Check out the sick rims on my APC, brah. But, admirably enough, virtually none of the core character advancement is tied to spending actual money. All of the major class skills, vehicle upgrades, and gun attachments need to be purchased with certification points, and those only accrue when you're earning experience. Weapons, on the other hand, have prohibitively high certification costs and, at between $2.50 and $7 a pop, comparatively affordable cash prices. The developers also allow for one free half-hour trial per weapon, so there's little chance of accidentally wasting money on some crummy pea shooter. It's all quite tastefully handled. Once everything finally clicks, Planetside 2 delivers a thrilling, delightfully chaotic multiplayer experience that's as worthy of your time as any of its $60 competition. Just be prepared to do a little homework first.
E3 2013 Nintendo Retro discuss future of Metroid. What will be the fate of Samsaran? By Richard George, June 12, 2013. Retro would love to work on the Metroid series again, but it's not currently doing so. Though many expected a move to HD would lure Retro back to the franchise that made it famous, Retro president Michael Klebor told me in an interview that his team felt Donkey Kong Country needed more attention. Well, we love Metroid. We love Metroid Prime and we always will. It was a big part of our studio, the culture of the studio. The majority of the team is still at Retro, Klebor said. When we finished with DK, we still had a lot of really cool ideas. That, in combination with what the Wii U could do, we really wanted to continue with that. Again, Retro Studios loves Metroid. We might do another one someday. But we really enjoyed working with DK as well. Of course, many Nintendo fans refuse to give up hope, and might assume that Retro is working on both Donkey Kong Country, Tropical Freeze and some sort of Metroid project. While the developer certainly might have ideas, and could be doing some tests, it won't be working on two major projects simultaneously. We're pretty much on one major project at a time. We do a game every 2 years or 3 years, Klebor said. In the first year of that, we have some extra bandwidth, so sometimes we helped out with Mario Kart 7. We help Monster Games do the 3DS version. Sometimes we'll have a little bit of extra bandwidth to help out other entities of Nintendo. We really feel strongly about helping out Nintendo as a whole, so if we have time, we'll do that. Do we have the bandwidth to do 2 major projects at once? I don't think so. A big project and a little project at the same time, we can do that. So Retro is working on Tropical Freeze. It doesn't have 2 teams working on 2 major projects, even though it might be interested in returning to Metroid one day. What, then, is the future of Samsaran's intergalactic adventures? I turned to Ken Zwickterp, an executive officer at Nintendo, and the man responsible for producing Retro's games, including the Metroid Prime series. Basically I'm thinking of, not just Sam's, but how we can expand the whole Sam's universe, Terp said. You remember Metroid Prime Hunters? I'm thinking about things like how we could make that go out further, with all these different bounty hunters as well. Stay tuned to
early data for console pre-orders from major online retailers in the United States show consumers pre-ordered approximately 3 PS4 units for every 2 Xbox One consoles during the period between Monday, June 10th to Wednesday, June 12th. While this is not an indication of future purchase intent, it does seem to suggest that Sony resonated louder with consumers during E3 2013 than Microsoft. IGN users were unquestionably swayed by Sony's messaging during this year's Electronic Entertainment Expo. We asked our readers who they thought was winning E3 during the show. Over 280,000 of you responded, and Sony took the top spot with 81% of the votes. Microsoft garnered 12% and Nintendo grabbed the remaining 7%. While Sony seems to have the advantage in the pre-order race at this point, Microsoft Games Studio VP Phil Spencer did respond to the recent consumer concerns over mandatory connectivity checks and the seemingly unfriendly approach towards used games and lending by saying, "This isn't a sprint. The platform launches this November. We've got more content to share." Pre-orders for both consoles are available now at a number of retailers.
Bioshock Infinite Image. See the trailer. To score 94 out of 100. Universal acclaim based on 27 critics. What's this? User score 8.5 out of 10. Generally favorable reviews based on 849 ratings. Your score 0. Summary. Once conceived as a floating symbol of American ideals at a time when the United States was emerging as our world power, Columbia has been dispatched to distant shores with great fanfare by a captivated public. What begins as a brand new endeavor of hope turns drastically wrong as the city so expand. Developer, Irrational Games. Genre, S. First-person shooters. Cheats, on-game fakes. Rating, M. Special controllers. Move compatible. More details and credits. Critic reviews. Positive, 27 out of 27. Mixed, 0 out of 27. Negative, 0 out of 27. PlayStation Official Magazine Australia, April 3, 2013. 100. Ultimately, Infinite will linger in your memory for a long time after the credits have rolled. Irrational Games, through its own turmoil have led staff departing, a multiplayer mode that started late in the piece only to be canned, a wise move, have proved that excellence takes time. This is a genre-defining game, and it deserves to be played by anyone who's ready for a brilliant story, engaging gunplay and a real challenge. May 2013, P68. All This Publications Reviews. D+ Pat Magazine, April 3, 2013. 100. When it comes down to it though, Bioshock Infinite is a labor of love, a staggeringly impressive achievement and an example of the invention and singularity of vision that so many big-budget games lack. All This Publications Reviews. Read full review. Dark Zero, April 1, 2013. 100. If you're reading this review because you have never played a Bioshock title before or didn't like the previous games but like the look of this one, then please, go play it. I am certain you won't be disappointed. All This Publications Reviews. Read full review. Thunderbolt, April 2, 2013. 80. The plot and combat could have been better, but its mode of storytelling demands your attention nonetheless, as there's no other experience like it, and, for a good many, that means a lot of return trips to come. All This Publications Reviews. Read full review. See all 27 critic reviews. User reviews. Writer review. Positive, 195 out of 225. Mixed, 14 out of 225. Negative, 16 out of 225. Protocoster, 10. Bioshock Infinite is one of the rare games where the gameplay, story, and pacing all come together to create a special kind of game that only expand. Helpful. 5 of 5 users said yes. 60 as the 1. 8. I would say this is a great game, but it's not better than original Bioshock. I only used like 4 of the vigors, because the others weren't rare expand. Helpful. 3 of 5 users said yes. Mig 7. 7. The game looks great and you can tell they put a lot into it, but something was lacking. The atmosphere is great at the beginning as well as th expand. Helpful. 13 of 20 users said yes. Koiku. 0. One of the most overrated titles I have ever laid my eyes upon. People praise it for graphics, shame I can't see them through the bloom. People expand. Bioshock Infinite is a stupendous game, portraying a beautiful and broken city that will absorb your every waking thought. The good. Columbia is an amazing place to be and explore. Depicts uncomfortable, relevant themes in an effective way. Vigors and skyline rails make for fluid, exciting action. Upgrades make you feel increasingly powerful. Mind-blowing ending that you won't soon forget. The bad. Occasional quirks and contrivances disrupt the immersion. What drives a man of God to wash away the sins of his past, only to blacken his heart with a multitude more? How far can a freedom fighter be pushed before virtue and righteousness are replaced by a lust for vengeance? What does a privileged society do when the foundation of its prosperity is shaken? Bioshock Infinite dares to explore these heady themes and many more, giving you glimpses at just how the seemingly smallest of decisions can forever alter our realities and our hearts. As an agent provocateur in the fantastical floating city of Columbia, your actions bring turmoil and strife to an ostensibly idyllic landscape. It's immensely fun to stir up trouble, and even more engaging to see how boldly Bioshock Infinite portrays a society torn asunder. You'll be haunted by this thematically devastating adventure, and indeed, its phenomenal final minutes, which are bound to be discussed and dissected for some time to come. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy. Comment on this video. Watch this video in high def. It starts with a lighthouse. As former private investigator Booker DeWitt, you enter this lighthouse knowing that you have been hired to retrieve the girl, but who this girl is, and who hired Booker, remain a mystery, if not to Booker, then at least to you. At the top of the lighthouse is a chair, and once strapped into it, Booker is fired into the stratosphere, toward the city in the sky called Columbia. And what a fitting name for this hyper-American domain of 1912, which incorporates the classical architecture of the 1893 Columbian Exposition. The red, white, and blue Columbian flag flies from spires across the city, and statuaries and bas-relief panels immediately evoke the sense of old America. The buildings of that 1893 exposition were part of an area known as the White City, and here, too, Columbia lives up to the name of its inspiration, not just in the whiteness of its buildings, but in the whiteness of its racial structure. At a key early moment, you confront the festering illness corrupting this porcelain white culture, where anyone whose skin is not the ideal color is ostracized and enslaved. You also confront one of Bishop Infinite's many core mysteries. What is the nature of the brand on Booker's hand? In Columbia, the brand is a mark of the false shepherd, this culture's version of the Christian Antichrist and the 666 that marks him. Identified as a prophesied fiend, Booker has no choice but to run. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God. Columbia is a tremendous place to be, the all-American dream turned nightmare cross with steampunk sensibilities. Nationalist propaganda is mixed with airships and mechanical competence, and the moving picture machines you occasionally use elaborate on the history of Columbia, which seceded from an America that just wasn't American enough. The leader of the city is Father Comstock, a self-proclaimed prophet and religious zealot whose likeness and influence pervade the game. What Andrew Ryan was to Rapture, Comstock is to Columbia. He is a frightfully well-meaning man who believes so strongly in his own damaged philosophies that you can only fear him. His worshippers are just as fearsome in their blind willingness to follow their leader, even when the costs are high. In Bishop Infinite, religious and political fervor intertwine, much as they do in real life, and these similarities could fill you with dread and unease. You eventually find the girl. She is the supernaturally talented Elizabeth, locked in a floating tower and protected by a monstrous clockwork creature called Songbird. Your first confrontation with Songbird is one of many eye-opening scenes, and Elizabeth's relationship with her protector is a complicated one. So is her relationship with Booker, for that matter, though he is key to Elizabeth's escape from her solitary life, and to the city of her dreams, Paris. And so the two go on the run, alternately exploring Columbia's private nooks and allying with a resistance force called the Vox Populi, not out of politics, but out of necessity. Columbia isn't as hushed and mysterious as Rapture, but exploring it's no less tense. You are a witness to, and a participant in, an imploding social order, and as the story darkens, so too do the places you investigate. Sunny blue skies and perfect man-made beaches give way to burning streets and ghostly memorials. When the narrative has you questioning the nature of reality, the sterility of the environment reflects your confusion. So, too, does the soundscape metamorphose. The concordant harmonies of a hymn of praise take a sour and ominous turn as the more disturbing qualities of Columbia's unerring faith emerge. Neither shall ye set up any image of stone in your land, to bow down unto it. Neither shall ye set up any image of stone in your land, to bow down unto it. Your confusion is appeased by audio recordings you discover called voxophones, which serve as personal diaries to past events. There are clues here to the nature of Elizabeth's gift, her ability to open tears in space-time and peer into the future, the past, other dimensions. Voxophones also elaborate on Columbia's most important citizens, such as Comstock's troubled, martyred wife, whose story illuminates the desperate lengths to which her husband stooped to ensure that his message might be heard in perpetuum. They even provide a few touches of humor, as do other atmospheric audio details. Alternate versions of well-known tunes could have you grinning once you pick your jaw up off the floor. Bishop Infinite is a first-person shooter, but you aren't armed just with machine guns, pistols, shotguns, and the like. You also have vigors. Vigors, like the original Bishop's plasmids, are seemingly magical powers that you can fling at your enemies. Thus, you can weaken your enemies by zapping them with a bolt of electricity or by charging into them at impossible speed. Try distracting them with a murder of crows before gunning them down with your carbine, or flinging them over the edge of a walkway with a shockwave and watching them plummet to their deaths. You may even combine these powers, perhaps setting a foe on fire and then charging into him for an explosive finish.
While many of your foes are of the gun-wielding human variety, the most notable of them have thematic ties to the world they inhabit. Plodding George Washington automatons threaten you with their chain guns, and the best way to bring them down is to aim at the gears that protrude from their bags. The way Colombian flags are draped behind these grotesque worries makes them look like dead-eyed angels of death, a perfect metaphor for the city's faith-driven nationalism. Surprisingly agile mechanical heavies may not be such obvious metaphors, but are more subtle reminders of the men bound by these skeletons of metal and the factory owner unmoved by his slaves' pleas for a better life. You often face these enemies in outdoor arenas that have you on the move in ways the first two Bioshock games never required. I beheld the mountains, and, lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. Comment on this video. Watch this video in high def. Such battlegrounds are given life by the Skyline railway system that winds through and around them. With the press of a button, you can latch onto a rail with an implement that functions as both a melee weapon and a Skyline hook. Enemies come at you from above and below, and sometimes even from airships that float into range, forcing you to grind the rails to get to higher ground, make a quick escape, or close the distance between you and a pesky sniper. You can leap from a rail and onto one of Comstick's faithful, skewering him before leaping back onto the Skyline and landing on the deck of an airship crowded with soldiers. It's rewarding to fling fire and blast enemies with shotguns as you zip about the hovering platforms, as if you're a vicious circus acrobat performing a murderous trapeze act. Elizabeth is usually at your side throughout such acrobatics, staying out of combat proper while offering you support. She occasionally tosses a health pack your way, or some salts, which power your vigors in the way you'd powered Bioshock's plasmids. As far as AI companions go, she's a fine one, rarely getting in the way, running ahead to indicate the proper direction, and unlocking doors and safes with the lockpicks you find scattered about. Things can still go a bit awry. Elizabeth might not make it into an elevator with you, for instance, leaving you to have a scripted, one-sided conversation. But such discrepancies are rare, and little touches, such as how Elizabeth exhibits curiosity in the world around her, tend to overshadow them. Lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein. Lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein. Elizabeth has one other important role to play. By accessing tiers in space-time, she can pull helpful objects into the battlefield, such as hovering security turrets, boxes of health packs, ledges with hooks to leap onto, and so forth. Such objects appear in the environment as if covered with television static, and you bring them into being by holding a button. This system is a contrived handling of one of the game's important narrative conceits, an intriguing element awkwardly translated into gameplay. Yet these tiers also give battles an extra sense of unpredictability, or provide important defensive elements when you most need them. That isn't to say that Bioshock Infinite is punishing. When you die, Elizabeth revives you, remaining enemies gain a little health back, and you lose a little coin from your pocket. The combat does exhibit a wonderful sense of growth, however. You find various clothing items that grant you additional passive buffs, such as turning enemies you leap on into human torches. You spend the coins you pilfer from corpses and cash registers on vigor and weapon upgrades, though you ultimately must pick and choose the direction you prefer, since you can't afford every possibility. Should you run out of ammo and use a weapon you haven't upgraded, the difference is notable. Suddenly you're facing a challenge you may not have expected. The final combat sequence gets frustrating should you be pushed into using weaker weaponry. It's the only battle in which Bioshock Infinite's stellar gameplay doesn't come together. Fortunately, the astounding narrative payoff is more than a proper reward for triumphing over this visually remarkable assault. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. Bioshock Infinite's combat is more freewheeling and fun than in the other games in the series, but its world is no less intriguing to explore. Secret codes yearn to be broken, and exquisitely crafted gardens and museums cry out for greater scrutiny. This is a game just as much about place as it is about play, and audio-visual touches invoke nostalgia for the original Bioshock in effective ways. There's the telltale mechanical tinkling of the vending machines that sell ammo and upgrades. There's the lure of loot, inspiring you to plunder every trash can and every lifeless body. Then there are the old-timey videos introducing each vigor, the sound scratching as if played on an ancient phonograph. Each element draws you further into Columbia, this place that so horrifyingly mirrors parts of our own reality that you could never call Bioshock Infinite escapist entertainment. Some annoying texture popping and screen tearing are the culprits mostly likely to disturb the captivation. Bioshock Infinite could make you feel uncomfortable. If you adhere to religious faith, or celebrate American idealism, this game may invite introspection or even anger. Bioshock Infinite isn't afraid to magnify the way religious and racial extremism inform our culture and change lives. It isn't afraid to depict a less than holy trinity diseased by power, deception, and manipulation. As the story circles back on itself, you're left wondering whether redemption cleanses us of our atrocities, or simply invites us to commit greater ones. Once the finale comes, you will want to play again, watching each event and image through the lens of information you can never know. Bioshock Infinite is more than just a quality game. It's an important one. They say you can learn more about filmmaking from studying bad movies than you can from good ones. In theory, no one actually intends to make a bad movie, so in order for a movie to become one, something must have gone wrong. By studying these movies, you find out what it was that made them so bad, and can learn from the mistakes that were made. I believe the same principle applies to video games, and for much the same reasons. Bad games are very rarely the result of intentional malice or flat-out stupidity. Sometimes there's budget problems, meaning developers had to cut corners, other times they run behind schedule, and sometimes, it's just boring old inexperience that lets people astray. Interactive Enterprises, and their infamous legacy, Action 52. Action 52 is an unlicensed multicode compilation, originally released for the NES, and then re-released for the Genesis in a dramatically altered form. The game, as the name would suggest, is a collection of 52 action games on a single card. Compilation games like this were pretty common back in the NES days, particularly among certain pirate game makers. Often, such cards would have a whole bunch of early Famicom games crammed together on a single cartridge. In this way, a 52 is somewhat unique, in that all 52 games are original to this compilation. Make no mistake, this is not a lost masterpiece of a game here, in any sense of the term. Action 52 is nothing short of a complete disaster, and regularly ranks as one of the worst games ever made, and it's not like there's a shortage of reasons why either. Shoddy mechanics, problematic gameplay, poor hit detection, and, well, in a nutshell, everything that makes a cheap game look and feel cheap is present in these games. So what went wrong? The short answer would be, like I said earlier, boring old inexperience. Active Enterprises is an example of what I like to call a gold rush developer. They had the programming know-how to put together a mostly functioning game, the business knowledge to get the project off the ground, and the ambition to pull it off, while failing to realize that the games industry was and is a harsh environment, and not just a means to quick and easy money. Similar gold rushes flooded the market with subpar Atari 2600 games, and more recently, with a glut of cheaply made minigame collections for the Wii. From a business standpoint, their idea makes perfect sense. Give gamers more game for their dollar. What Active failed to realize is that it's quality, not quantity, that separates good games from average ones, and with all 52 games failing to meet even the most basic standard of quality, the project was doomed from the start. 2 games were released under the name Action 52, but aside from the name itself, and a few recurring characters, they have practically nothing in common.